Put her meal on a separate check. She can pay herself. That's what my son's wife told the waiter. She didn't whisper it. She said it loud enough for the whole table to hear, loud enough that a couple at the next booth glanced over and chuckled. Then, as if on cue, the people sitting with us laughed too. It wasn't just a joke. It was meant to sting. And believe me, it did. I sat there with my fork hovering above the plate, my cheeks burning, wondering how the girl my son married had turned into someone so casually cruel. I didn't know whether to defend myself or to sink down in my chair until I disappeared. Before I get too far into this story, let me tell you who I am. My name is Marjorie. I'm 72 years old, a widow for nearly 20 years. When my husband passed, I was 40-something, and my son was just starting high school. Life didn't leave me much room to grieve. I had to keep the house, work 2 jobs, and make sure that boy of mine had every chance at a future. I never remarried. I never went on vacations, never bought myself fancy clothes. Every dollar I earned went to bills, groceries, and saving for my son's education. I wanted him to walk a different road than I did, a road without constant worry about making ends meet. And he did. He grew up smart, hard-working, and ambitious. At least, that's how I remembered him. Now, before I dive into what happened that night, let me pause to ask you something. Tell me, where are you watching from tonight? I love knowing where my stories travel, whether you're sitting with a cup of tea in your kitchen or lying in bed in some far-off city. It keeps me company in a way. All right, back to the table. This wasn't the first time my daughter-in-law, Rachel, had tried to put me in my place. She's younger than my son by 3 years, pretty and polished, always wearing clothes that look like they cost more than my car. At first, I thought she was just proud of herself, maybe a little high-strung. But over the years, the small remarks piled up, about how I dressed, about how I still lived in the same modest house, about the old-fashioned way I cooked. I stayed quiet most of the time. What good would it do to complain? My son seemed happy with her, and that mattered more to me than my pride. But that night, when she told the waiter to split my meal from theirs, it wasn't just a passing remark. It was a performance, staged in front of strangers and my own son. I looked at him, hoping for some sign, anything, that he would correct her, that he'd lean over and say, "Don't be ridiculous, we're all family." But he just kept his eyes on his drink, swirling the ice around, pretending not to hear. That was the part that hurt the most. Not her words, but his silence. I tried to steady myself, lifting the glass of water in front of me so my hand wouldn't shake. The waiter looked uncomfortable. He shifted from one foot to the other, not sure if he should write it down or wait for me to object. And the rest of the table kept laughing, though softer now, like the kind of laughter people use to cover up discomfort. I smiled. A small, brittle smile. The kind you give when you don't want anyone to see how much it cut you. "That's fine," I said. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. But inside, a storm was brewing. The thing about getting older is you learn to hold your tongue. You let little insults slide. You tell yourself it's not worth the fight. But something about that moment, the waiter standing there awkwardly, my son staring into his glass, and Rachel grinning like she had won some invisible game, made me realize how far things had gone. I wasn't just being teased. I was being dismissed. And yet, I kept my composure. I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of seeing me crumble. As the conversation around me picked up again, my mind began to wander. I thought back to all the nights I had stayed up sewing clothes for my son so he'd look sharp at school. The mornings I woke before dawn to pack his lunches. The college tuition I worked overtime to cover. None of it mattered at that table. In their eyes, I was just an extra mouth to feed, someone to be tolerated. I didn't know it then, but that night was about to take a turn no one at that table expected. But before we get there, you need to understand how we ended up in that restaurant in the first place, and why my daughter-in-law felt bold enough to humiliate me in front of strangers. When my husband passed, it was sudden. One moment he was there, drinking his morning coffee and fiddling with the crossword, and the next moment he wasn't. A heart attack, quick and merciless. I had no time to prepare, no cushion of savings, and certainly no plan for raising a teenager alone. My son, Daniel, was just 15 then, too old to cling to my skirt, too young to be left to fend for himself. The first few years after his father's death were a blur of exhaustion. I worked days at the local library shelving books, nights cleaning offices downtown. My hands were always chapped from cleaning fluid, my back stiff from standing on ladders. But I never let Daniel see me complain. If I broke down, I did it in the bathroom with the faucet running so he wouldn't hear. He needed strength from me, not weakness. Daniel was smart, always had been. He loved science fairs, tinkering with gadgets, building things from scraps. I pushed him to chase every opportunity. When other boys were hanging around the corner store, Daniel was in the garage with a soldering iron, building radios and robots. I couldn't give him everything, but I could give him time and encouragement. And when he won a scholarship for college, I thought my sacrifices had finally paid off. I lived frugally, no vacations, no big purchases. The same house, the same furniture, the same car I'd been driving since the 90s. I wore clothes until the seams gave way. Everything extra went toward Daniel. I didn't resent it. That was what mothers did. When he graduated, I felt such pride. My boy, the first in the family to earn a degree. I remember standing in the crowd, clapping until my palms stung, tears blurring my vision. He shook my hand after the ceremony, grinning ear to ear, and said, "Mum, I couldn't have done it without you." That sentence carried me through years of hard work. But life changes once children leave the nest. He got a job in finance, and soon after he met Rachel. I remember the first time I met her. Tall, stylish, with the kind of confidence that filled a room. She shook my hand firmly and complimented my necklace. "Vintage," she said. I smiled, thinking she had a good eye. At the beginning, I thought she was just nervous around me, maybe trying a little too hard. She laughed too loudly at Daniel's jokes and called me Mrs. Harris, even after I asked her to use my first name. Still, I told myself it was just adjustment. Every new marriage has a learning curve. But small comments began to trickle in. Subtle, at first. When I brought a casserole to their housewarming party, she whispered, "So old-fashioned. Daniel prefers takeout." At Christmas, I gave her a handmade quilt I'd been working on for months. She held it up politely, then folded it quickly and set it aside, like it was something to be stored in a closet rather than used. I shrugged it off. Maybe she just had a different upbringing. Maybe she didn't understand the meaning behind handmade things. But the unease grew. Family dinners became rare. When we did gather, it was always on her terms, her restaurants, her circle of friends. Daniel seemed caught between us, though he never said anything outright. When I spoke, she interrupted. When I tried to join a conversation, she redirected it. And my son, whether he noticed or not, didn't correct her. It wasn't that she screamed or insulted me directly. It was the little exclusions, the way she tightened her grip on Daniel's attention, the way she made me feel like an outsider in my own family, like I was tolerated, not embraced. Still, I endured. I reminded myself, she was his choice, and my place was to support his happiness. I stayed quiet, swallowing every slight. But inside, I kept a running tally. Not of resentment, but of awareness. That's why, when she invited me to dinner at the restaurant that night, something in me hesitated. It wasn't her voice on the phone. It was Daniel's. "Mum, Rachel thought it would be nice if we all went out." It sounded like a peace offering. Maybe, just maybe, we'd turn a corner. So I dressed carefully, pressed my best blouse, polished my shoes. I told myself it was just dinner. But as I sat at that table, watching Rachel order the most expensive glass of wine without even glancing at the price, I knew better. She didn't invite me there to include me. She invited me there to showcase her control. And I, foolishly hopeful, walked right into it. When Daniel called and said, "Mum, Rachel thought it would be nice if we all went out," I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe she was finally extending an olive branch. I said yes, before I let myself think too much about it. The truth was, I didn't get many invitations anymore. Most weekends, Daniel and Rachel were busy with her friends, her family, her plans. Birthdays and holidays I might see them, but the spontaneous dinners, the little visits, those had faded. So when he called, I felt a spark of hope. Maybe Rachel had turned a corner. Maybe she'd decided I wasn't such a burden after all. I spent more time than usual getting ready. I ironed a cream-colored blouse I'd been saving, spritzed a little perfume I hadn't worn in years. Standing in front of the mirror, I thought, if she wants to make peace, I'll meet her halfway. The restaurant was one of those sleek places with tall glass windows and warm lighting. The kind of place where you could tell, just from the valet stand, that the prices were designed to impress. The minute I stepped inside, I could feel the hum of money in the air. Soft jazz playing, servers gliding between tables, the clink of expensive silverware. I spotted them near the center. Rachel, sitting upright in a fitted dress, hair perfectly smoothed back, already swirling a glass of wine. Daniel next to her, laughing at something she'd just said. He looked relaxed, comfortable. When his eyes caught mine, he waved warmly. That small gesture made the trip worth it. "Mum," he said, standing up to hug me. "Glad you came." Rachel gave me a smile, the kind you practice in front of a mirror. "So nice you could join us tonight," she said, her tone polite but cool, like a hostess greeting a guest at an event. I sat down, folded my napkin into my lap, and glanced around the table. A couple of Rachel's friends were there too, people I barely knew but had seen at gatherings. Young, stylish, with manicured nails, and conversations peppered with mentions of travel, investments, and things I'd never had the luxury to think about. I kept quiet, listening. They talked about new restaurants opening downtown, real estate trends, someone's latest trip to Italy. When the server came by with menus, Rachel didn't hesitate. She pointed at a bottle of wine. "We'll have that one," and handed the menu back without blinking. I peeked at the list. The price of that one bottle was more than my week's groceries. I ordered something simple, grilled chicken with vegetables and a glass of water. The meal began pleasantly enough, at least pleasant on the surface. Rachel's friends laughed. Daniel told a few light stories from work, and I tried to stay present. But beneath it all, I could feel the current. Rachel never once asked about me, about my health, about my life. If I tried to contribute, she redirected the conversation. Her friends followed her lead, their eyes sliding past me as if I wasn't really part of the evening. I told myself to bear it. It wasn't worth spoiling Daniel's night. But then came the moment that still rings in my ears. The waiter returned, pad in hand, ready to take note of the checks. Rachel, without looking at me, without missing a beat, said it. Loud, crisp, deliberate. "Put her meal on a separate check. She can pay herself." The words hung in the air like smoke. Her friends laughed, not cruelly, more like they were following her cue. The kind of laugh people do when they're not sure if something is a joke, but don't want to be left out. My son, my Daniel. He didn't laugh, but he didn't say a word either. He stared down into his drink, swirling the ice around as if it were the most fascinating thing in the world. And just like that, I was no longer at a family dinner. I was the punchline. I could feel my face flush hot. The waiter shifted uncomfortably, pen hovering above his pad, eyes darting to me as if waiting for my reaction. My throat tightened, but I managed to nod and say, "That's fine." My voice came out even, though inside I felt small, like a child being scolded in public. Rachel smirked, satisfied, and the conversation resumed as though nothing had happened. But I knew something had shifted in me. All those years of swallowing little slights, of keeping quiet for the sake of peace, they piled up and tipped over in that one moment. For the first time, I realized this wasn't about misunderstanding or differences in upbringing. This was deliberate. She wanted me embarrassed. She wanted me diminished. And Daniel, well, his silence said enough. The clinking of glasses around me suddenly sounded louder. Every laugh, every scrape of silverware against porcelain felt like it was echoing inside my skull. Rachel's words, "She can pay herself," didn't just hang in the air. They sank into me like a blade. I kept my hands steady on my lap, but I could feel them trembling ever so slightly. I reached for my water glass just to have something to hold. My voice had stayed even when I told the waiter it was fine, but inside, I was in pieces. Do you know what it feels like to have people laugh at you? Not strangers on the street, not co-workers, but your own family. It's a different kind of pain. You expect strangers to be unkind sometimes, but your own blood, your own son, the boy you worked yourself to the bone for, when he lets you sit there as people laugh at your expense, it cuts deeper than anything else. I glanced at Daniel again. He didn't look at me. He just tapped the rim of his glass with his finger, eyes fixed downward. He wasn't laughing, but his silence was worse than laughter. It was a quiet betrayal, and I felt it like a weight pressing on my chest. The waiter, God bless him, looked like he wanted the floor to open and swallow him whole. His eyes flickered to me, then back to his notepad. He gave the smallest awkward nod and scribbled down the request. He didn't want to challenge Rachel, and I didn't blame him. She radiated the kind of confidence people instinctively avoid crossing. Rachel leaned back in her chair, satisfied. She took another sip of wine, lips curving into the faintest smirk. Her friends chuckled a little longer, the kind of empty laughter people use to keep up appearances. Then the conversation drifted back to real estate prices and designer handbags, as if I weren't sitting there burning with shame. I tried to chew my food when it came, but every bite turned to sawdust in my mouth. I cut the chicken into neat little pieces, more for something to do than to eat. I nodded when someone mentioned a vacation home. I smiled politely when a joke was told, but I couldn't taste, couldn't laugh. I was outside of the circle, and they all knew it. My thoughts wouldn't stop racing. How did I end up here? How did I become the target? I thought about the years I spent working myself raw so Daniel could stand tall. The birthday parties where I scraped together enough to make him feel special. The nights I stayed awake, balancing bills with a calculator and notebook, praying I could stretch every dollar far enough. And now I was a burden to be laughed at, a joke to be dismissed. It wasn't even about the bill. I could have paid for my own meal 10 times over. It was about the message. Rachel wanted me to know I was separate, that I didn't belong at that table as family. And Daniel's silence confirmed that she had the power to make it true. I dabbed the corners of my mouth with the napkin, forcing myself to breathe slowly. My mother always used to say, "Dignity is the only thing no one can take from you. You have to hand it over yourself." I wasn't going to hand it over. Not to Rachel. Not to anyone. So I sat straighter. I chewed my tasteless chicken. I let them talk about their expensive vacations and cars. But I promised myself something in that moment. I wouldn't forget this. I wouldn't let this slide into the pile of small humiliations I had been swallowing for years. The restaurant around us carried on. Couples chatted softly, waiters floated gracefully. The jazz band in the corner played a song I recognized but couldn't name. To everyone else, it was just another night out. To me, it was a breaking point. There's something strange about moments like that. You think you'll cry or shout or storm off. But I didn't. I stayed calm, almost unnervingly calm, like a storm gathering strength far out at sea. On the surface, I looked like nothing had happened. But inside, something shifted. When Rachel leaned toward her friend to gossip about someone from her social club, I caught the way her hand brushed Daniel's arm, staking her claim. I noticed the way she glanced at me, just briefly, her eyes glinting with triumph. She thought she had won. She didn't know what was coming next. Because humiliation, as sharp as it is, sometimes clears your vision. It strips away the illusions and leaves you face to face with the truth. And the truth was this: I wasn't powerless. I wasn't the poor widow she wanted the world to think I was. No one at that table knew who really owned the roof over their heads that night. Not yet. I was just cutting another piece of chicken, pretending to be part of a conversation I wasn't really included in, when I saw him out of the corner of my eye, the restaurant owner. He was a tall man, probably in his late 50s, with salt and pepper hair and a crisp suit that looked like it belonged in a magazine. I'd known him for years, though no one at the table knew that. To them, he was just another manager checking on guests. But to me, he was someone who had shaken my hand in an empty dining room more than a decade ago, when I signed papers that changed the course of both our lives. He walked with a quiet authority, the kind that doesn't need to announce itself. People moved slightly out of his way without realizing they were doing it. He came straight toward our table. Rachel was in the middle of a story, something about a weekend trip to Napa and a winery tour, but her voice trailed off when she noticed him. You could see it in her posture. She was ready to turn on her charm, to greet him like she belonged in the kind of circles that owners of fine restaurants walked in. But he didn't look at her. His eyes were on me. "Mrs. Harris," he said warmly, bowing his head slightly. "It's been too long." The table went silent. Even the jazz band seemed to fade into the background. Rachel blinked. "You know her?" The owner smiled. "Of course I do. This place wouldn't exist without her." Then he turned to me, voice carrying just enough for the surrounding tables to hear. "The bill is already taken care of. She owns this place." The words hit like a thunderclap. Rachel's fork clattered onto her plate. One of her friends gasped softly, another choked on her sip of wine. Daniel froze, eyes darting between me and the owner like he'd just been told the sky was green. I stayed still, napkin in my lap, expression calm. Inside, my heart pounded. Not from fear, but from the weight of truth, finally stepping into the light. Rachel leaned forward, stammering, "Wait, what do you mean she owns it?" The owner chuckled lightly. A man who had repeated this story enough times to feel proud every time he told it. When this place was failing years ago, she believed in it, invested her savings, stood by us when no one else would. Without her, we wouldn't be standing here today. He looked at me again, his eyes kind. "It's an honor, always, when you come in, Mrs. Harris." I nodded gently, my voice even. "Thank you." The silence at the table stretched. I could feel the stares from Rachel's friends, from diners nearby who had overheard. That laughter from earlier? Gone. Not a sound. The balance had shifted in an instant. Rachel tried to recover, plastering on a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Well, isn't that something?" she said, her voice thin, brittle. I looked at her, really looked at her. For the first time all evening, she didn't have control of the room. Her confidence faltered, her hand tightening around her wineglass as if it could steady her. Daniel finally spoke, his voice quiet. "Mum, you never told me." I met his gaze. Some things don't need to be told, not right away. I didn't elaborate, didn't explain, didn't fill the silence with excuses. I let the truth sit there, heavy and undeniable. The owner gave me a small bow once more, then excused himself politely, leaving our table under a different kind of spotlight than before. And there it was. The power Rachel thought she had over me dissolved in front of everyone. She had wanted to show me up, to put me in my place. Instead, she had revealed her own pettiness. I didn't gloat, I didn't smirk or rub it in. Dignity doesn't require theatrics. I simply picked up my fork, took another bite of my meal, and let the silence around me speak louder than anything I could have said. Inside, though, I could feel something loosening. Years of swallowed humiliation, of quiet endurance. Not revenge, not victory. Just balance restored. Rachel avoided my eyes for the rest of the meal. Her friends whispered to one another, their tones hushed, as if afraid of being overheard. Daniel kept sneaking glances at me, his face a mix of confusion, admiration, and guilt. For the first time that night, I wasn't invisible. I was undeniable. The table stayed quiet after the owner left, but my mind drifted back to the very beginning, the part no one at that table knew, the part I had carried silently all these years. It was about 15 years ago, not long after Daniel had gone off to college. The house was emptier than it had ever been, and the days seemed longer. I had picked up extra hours at the library and the cleaning job downtown, but the loneliness weighed heavier than the work. Money was still tight, though. Tuition bills came in thick envelopes, and I paid them with hands that shook after each overtime shift. One evening, I wandered into this very restaurant. Back then, it wasn't sleek or buzzing with life. It was half empty, paint peeling in the corners, tables sitting unused. The food was decent, but the place had no spark. I sat at the counter with a cup of coffee, flipping through the classifieds for more part-time jobs. That's when the owner, then much younger, more desperate than distinguished, sat beside me. He struck up a conversation. He told me about his dream, how he'd poured everything into opening the restaurant, how the bills were swallowing him faster than he could keep up. He wasn't complaining, more like confessing to a stranger because sometimes it's easier that way. I listened. I always had a soft spot for people who tried to build something from nothing. By the time I paid for my coffee, I couldn't shake the thought. This place deserved a chance. It sounds foolish, I know. I didn't have much, just the modest insurance money left after my husband's passing, savings I had pinched from years of living frugally, and whatever extra I scraped together from my jobs. Every rational thought told me to keep that money safe, tucked away for emergencies. But something in me wanted to risk it, not for glamour, not for recognition, but because I believed in working people who poured their souls into their dreams. So I came back the next week, and the week after. Eventually, I told the owner, "I don't have much, but I can help." We met with a lawyer. Papers were signed. I became a quiet partner, with my name tucked in the official documents. No flashy announcements, no plaques with my name. I didn't need that. What I needed was a sense of stability, a hope that maybe, just maybe, the investment would grow into something Daniel could lean on if he ever needed it. At first, the restaurant stumbled along. There were weeks when I thought I'd made the biggest mistake of my life. But slowly, it began to find its footing. The food improved, word spread, the crowds came. Year after year it grew into the beautiful place it is now. And all the while I remained in the background. The staff knew me. The owner always treated me with gratitude and respect, but I never flaunted it. I never told Daniel. Not because I wanted to hide it from him, but because I didn't want his choices in life to be shaped by the safety net of knowing his mother had something tucked away. I wanted him to build his own life, his own pride, just like I had to. Every dividend I received, I reinvested. Every extra dollar, I let it sit and grow. I lived simply, still in my little house, still driving my old car, because I didn't need anyone to see wealth hanging from my shoulders. I just needed to know I was secure. And I'll tell you this, there was a quiet satisfaction in walking into that restaurant and being greeted like family, not as a customer. The servers smiled wider. The chefs came out to say hello. They didn't see me as some lonely old widow. They saw me as part of the foundation of the place. That night at the table, when the owner bowed his head to me, that's what Rachel and her friends didn't understand. It wasn't about owning a restaurant. It wasn't about money. It was about the years of sacrifice, the risks I had taken, the dignity I had fought to maintain when the world kept trying to strip it away. Rachel wanted the world to see me as a burden. Instead, the truth stood up, clear and undeniable. I was the reason her wine glass was filled, the reason her entree arrived on a fine plate, the reason she had chosen this place to flaunt her status. And she hadn't even known. I didn't boast. I didn't explain all of this out loud at the table. But the story lived in me, strong and steady, like a backbone made of steel. Daniel still looked stunned. He didn't ask questions then. He just studied me, maybe realizing for the first time that he didn't know the full extent of what his mother was capable of. And Rachel? She shrank into her seat, fork resting uselessly on her plate, eyes darting anywhere but at me. For once, she had no quick remark, no polished quip. The power she thought she had, it was gone. The table felt like it had lost its balance. Just minutes earlier, Rachel was the one holding court, her voice carrying, her friends laughing in rhythm with her cues. But after the owner's words, "She owns this place," everything shifted. The laughter was gone. Even the music from the jazz band in the corner seemed distant, as if the air itself had thickened. Rachel's smile faltered. "Well," she said, her tone brittle, "isn't that wonderful news?" She let out a laugh, too sharp, too rehearsed. Her friends tried to follow, but it came out awkward, like a joke no one believed in. I didn't rush to answer. I lifted my fork, cut into my meal, and chewed slowly. Silence can be its own kind of answer, and in that moment, it said more than words could. Daniel shifted beside her, finally speaking. "Mum, you never told me." His voice wasn't angry, just surprised, almost ashamed. I met his eyes. "Not everything needs to be told," I said evenly. "Some things are just lived." He looked down, and for the first time that night, I saw him thinking, not about Rachel's stories or the menu, but about me. Really about me. Rachel fumbled to recover, her voice higher than before. "I'm sure she didn't mean to keep it a secret," she said quickly. "It's just surprising, that's all." She glanced at her friends, but they weren't nodding along this time. If anything, they looked at her with raised brows, their loyalty wavering. The waiter came by to refill glasses, leaning closer to me than anyone else. "Always an honor, Mrs. Harris," he said quietly. His respect cut sharper than Rachel's mockery ever had. Her cheeks flushed. She held her wineglass like a shield, but the smirk she usually wore had vanished. For once, she had no witty remark, no control over the room. She had been unmasked by the truth, not by me. Daniel sighed, leaning back in his chair. His silence now wasn't the same as before. Earlier it was avoidance. Now it was reckoning. He kept glancing at me, as though realizing for the first time that he didn't know the full shape of the woman who had raised him. Dessert menus were offered, but no one had the appetite. Rachel murmured something about being full. Daniel shook his head. The tension was thick, and no one dared to break it. When the bill came, the server placed it on the table, but addressed me directly. "Of course, everything is taken care of." Rachel's eyes flickered down, then away. She didn't move to touch the check holder. She didn't speak. I placed my napkin gently on the table. "Thank you," I said. And that was all. We stood to leave. Rachel clutched her purse tightly, her posture no longer proud, but defensive. Daniel lingered, his eyes searching mine. "Mum," he said softly, like he wanted to ask 100 questions, but couldn't find where to start. I gave his arm a gentle squeeze. "It's all right." Then I walked past them toward the door. The night air outside was cool against my face. For the first time in a long time, I felt light. Not triumphant, not vengeful, just steady. Rachel had tried to strip me of dignity, but dignity isn't something anyone can take. You have to hand it over yourself. And I hadn't. When I got home, I sat in my chair by the window. The house was quiet, as it had been for years. But I wasn't lonely. I thought of my husband, long gone, and how he used to tell me, "You're stronger than you know. Don't let anyone make you small." That night, I remembered what he meant. Betrayal always hurts more from the people closest to you. Rachel's cruelty stung, but Daniel's silence, that had been harder to swallow. Still, maybe now he saw me differently. Maybe he would think about the years I carried him, the sacrifices I made, the risks I took. Maybe he'd realized that the woman he thought of as just mom had built something lasting all on her own. And Rachel? She learned something too. Respect isn't bought with a designer dress or a glass of expensive wine. It isn't commanded by arrogance. Respect comes from how you carry yourself when others try to tear you down. I didn't gloat that night. I didn't need to. The truth had done the speaking. And so I'll ask you, if you'd been in my place, what would you have done? Would you have spoken out? Or would you have let silence, steady and unshakable, do the talking for you? Sometimes silence is the loudest answer of all.